Good morning. Today we are going to discuss the topic on externality and the other aspect of information asymmetry. And this is also part of the continuous journey from the information asymmetry and the other aspects we had discussed in the previous lecture, such as uncertainty and other things. So, externality is in fact had also uh, been a part of an earlier discussion. However, it had a very limited application before 1940s, because 1940s only the externality tried to be conceptualized in a rigorous sense, especially by the observation of Setowski and later by Buchanan and Stubblebine in 1961 and 1961-62, and later on this become a very important subject of consideration in that sense. So the externality occurs whenever the activity of one economic agent affects the activity of another economic agent in a way that are not reflected in the market transaction. So this is actually in that sense it is trying to define a particular idea that is for example in a private interaction there is a cost or benefit which could or which perhaps been inflicted to the other person uh, who are basically not in the transaction process directly, or in another sense you can say that externality is a cost which inflict basically based on production or consumption uh, in a third party. So for example A and B transacts, but the effect of A and B uh, can also spills over to a third party called C, and the C either get a benefit or a cost upon it. For example, of a popular example one can simply make as a positive externality and a negative externality as the following. That is a positive externality of the same thing. We can be demonstrated with the same example. For example, we are using perfume spray, and if you use a perfume spray, very nice perfume spray, if a person likes nice smell, this is actually gives a kind of an energizing thing, though the person is not actually been paid for it in that sense. But at the same time, the same can also cause trouble if a person is having some breathing issues, such as asthmatic and all. So some strong order can basically, or in the order in the sense a good order, in even if it is a good order, it can basically make a sort of trouble or a cost to the third party who is basically not in the process of discussion or in the process of transaction per se. So this is actually called, this transaction in that sense is actually a production transaction or a consumption transaction. Now if it is an exchange transaction, then things are going to be different, which we are not normally call as externality, but it is a kind of externality. This is what is actually being discussed by Buchanan and Stubblebine in their article, and indeed they were citing Coase proposition and all. So they were talking about a kind of a transaction cost in that sense. So we will discuss that thoroughly once we advance towards the transaction cost understanding and all. So a chemical manufacturer releases a popular, very negative kind of an understanding. You can see from this following example, like a chemical manufacturing release toxic fumes, noise from airplane, motorist littering roadways, etc. So now these are actually called the externality, which is having a kind of a positive or a negative cost or benefit upon the people who are not basically directly involved in the process of transaction. So this is what is actually in a nutshell we are going to discuss in this. Now Does it have any influence in the real world economic understanding? Of course, it do have influence because there are so many things involved in that. So let us look one by one. So inter-firm externalities in that sense is something which consider two firms, one producing good X and other producing good Y. In that case, the production of X will have an external effect on the production of Y if the output of Y depends not only on the level of input chosen by the firm but also on the level of at which X is being produced. So this is what is actually called the dependency of firms, and that is in fact a product of the externality in that sense. So Y is a function of a K, L and X in that sense. So the beneficent externality it can be discussed in the form of the relationship between the two firms can be beneficial. That is, two firms, one producing honey and the other producing apples. This is what is actually I said in the context of earlier the perfume spray. Now, instead of that, we can have a production example like the bee and beekeeper and the orchard in that sense. So once you have an apple or any kind of uh, orchard which is actually been running, then the nearby person actually raises or keep bees. Then this is also helps the person who is runs this orchard also, because the pollination process is being very smooth in that particular context. So in that sense, there is an externality, though they are not being paying for pollination, or they are not being paid for getting the what you call honey by this bee in that sense. So it's a natural process. So they are getting a sort of a benefit out of it in that process. This is in a good sense. But if you're very strict in this process of running certain industry, if you don't like and all, and then that is all makes a kind of a negative way of looking at the problem. But we are not talking about that. We are only seeing the very positive activity of that particular context. So externality can also occur if the activities of an economic agent directly affect an individual's utility in that. So externality can decrease or increase the utility in that. So we have seen that in the perfume spray case, if you have wheezing and all, or you are asthmatic, this perfume can cause trouble, which is reduces your utility. Whereas if it is on the contrary, if you like it, you like the smell and all, you can actually better feel a betterness in that particular process. However, you are not being paid. Okay, so it is also possible for someone's utility to be independent on the utility of another in that. So utility is there equals, that is, you have a US which is x1 x2 xn plus a uj of the other person. So now once you have this thing, then you have different commodities in place in the real world, like the private good vis-a-vis the public good. So let's look into the public good aspect of it. When we speak about public good are non-exclusive, once they are produced, they provide benefits to an entire group. That means it is because of the non-excludability. Once the commodity being produced, then it is uh, the the benefit of that particular commodity cannot be excluded to any single person, because that is what is the characteristics of non-excludability. Everybody is entitled to use that. So it is impossible to restrict these benefits to a specific group of individuals who pay for them in that sense. So externality lead to inefficient allocation of resources because market price do not accurately reflect the additional cost imposed on or the benefit provided to third party in that context. So we can show this by using a general equilibrium model with only one individual. So let's look into that aspect. Suppose that the individual's utility function is given as utility is equal to u of xc and yc in that sense. So where the xc and yc are the levels of x and y consumed. So the individual has initial stock of an x star and a y star, which will be given as what they are actually using, or the use level in that sense. So can consume them or use them in production also. So if it is actually been replaced by, instead of an C, a P, we can say that it has been produced. Now, if that is the case, then assume that good X is produced using only good Y according to X0, which is equal to f of Y I in that sense. So that individual. Now, that is X0 is actually function of the Yi in that sense. So assume that the output of good Y depends on both the amount of X used in the production process and amount of X being produced in that sense. So Y0, which is also equals a G of Xi and X0 in that sense. So for example, Y could be produced a downriver from X, and thus firm Y must cope with the pollution that production of an X creates. So this is a very popular example, the upstream downstream firms. For example, if a firm is being located in the upstream, then naturally the production, the pollutant can travel through the upstream to downstream. If the fisheries depends on, or the laundries depend on the downstream, then issues will get aggravated, because they are not directly engaged in, but the externality being affected affected the laundromat or the fisher folk in that sense. So this is a classic example you can see in many of the literature. So this implies that there is a G1 0, G1 which is greater than 0, and a G2 which is less than 0 in that sense. So the quantities of each good in this economy are constrained by the initial stock available, and by the additional production that takes place in that sense. So you have an XC plus an XI, which is equal to X0 plus X star. Okay, now the same is actually the case with YC plus YI, which is equal to X0 plus Y star in that sense. So once you have all this thing, then we can easily find out the efficient allocation in that sense. So the economic problem is to maximize the utility subject to the four constraints listed earlier. That is, when you want to basically understand this particular aspect, let's place the Lagrangian case where there is any difference of that same constraint which we placed and understood has anything to do with, or has any sort of disturbance in that sense. So when you have a Lagrangian application, then the whole equation turns out to be as you have a u which is xc and yc plus a lambda 1 of f of yi minus xi x0. So this is the first case, and then the second case for the lambda second times gxi and x0 minus y0 plus again a lambda 3 plus lambda 3 xc plus xi minus x0 minus x star plus lambda 4 in that. So all the equation will be being multiplied with a constant which is called lambda. So the first order condition hence been followed in this line. You have a dou L by dou xc, which is equal to u1 utility of 1 plus lambda 3, which is equal to 0. Again, you have keep on extending it, and you can find out that there is a difference, or the difference supposed to be 0 in that sense. So otherwise you say that there is a disturbance, there is no optimality. So take the, because this portion we have already discussed in the second semester, so I'm not going to the details of it. So taking the ratio of the first two, we find marginal rate of substitution, which is equal to u1 by u2, which is equal to this lambda 3 and lambda 4, the ratio of lambda 3 and lambda 4. The third and sixth equation also imply that marginal rate of substitution, which is actually the lambda 3 by lambda 4, which is equal to lambda 2 G1 by lambda 2, which is equal to G1 in that sense. So the optimality in Y production requires that the individual's marginal rate of substitution and consumption equals to the marginal productivity of an X in the production of Y. That means production of X is actually dependent on, in the very beginning we said production of X is also dependent on production of Y in that context. The example which I said is not the producing firm, but the laundromat's case or the fisherman's case. This is perfectly in alliance. So why? Because the fish stock may be get depleted if the pollution rate increase, or the cost of actually laundry will increase, therefore, or the quality or the kind of quantity being demanded from the laundromat will also fall, because if the water is bad, then the cleanliness of the clothes would be actually in doubt, and then that ultimately results of kind of a production which is dependent on the level of pollution in that sense. So this is actually interdependent in that sense. That is what is we are trying to make, which was never been considered earlier. So finding the efficient allocation therefore is also comes with this understanding. To achieve efficiency in X production, we must also consider the externality of this production process to Y. Combining the last three equation gives you a marginal rate of substitution, which is nothing but the lambda 3 by lambda 4, which is an inverse of lambda 1 plus lambda 2G2 whole divided by lambda 4, which is lambda, the inverse of lambda 1 by lambda 4 plus lambda 2 G2 by lambda 4, which is nothing but the marginal rate of substitution is 1 by f of y minus G2 in that sense. That means the total output in that sense is also be dependent on the kind of an pollution, if it is a pollution case, and there are many other cases which we can actually discuss in that context. The loss which incurs of that will be subtracted from this thing. So that would be the net effect of the rate of substitution which they may be. So this equation requires the individual's marginal rate of substitution to equal to dy by dx obtained through X production. That is, we have already seen that 1 by f of y or 1 by fy represents the reciprocal of the marginal productivity of y in X production. So G2 represents the negative impact that added X production has on Y output in that sense. So allow us to consider the externality from X production, then we can find out other issues also, but I'll come to that later. So let us look into the inefficiency of the competitive allocation. So reliance on competitive pricing will result in an inefficient allocation of a result. So this is what is in a nutshell when there is a positive externality exist. Has to be kept in mind. So a utility maximizing individual will opt for marginal rate of substitution, which is equal to px by py in that sense. But now we have already said that px by py is not the case. And the profit maximizing producer of y would choose x input according to the px by px, which is equal to py g1 in that sense. So, but the producer of an x would choose y input so that py, which is equal to px fy, which is nothing but the px by py, which is equal to 1 by f of y, fy in that sense. So this means that the producer of x would disregard the externality that its production process for y and will produce x unit of output. This is actually the classic case of a pollutant firm. What is actually their interest? If they do have actually this, there comes the importance of Coase Theorem. So I'll discuss about Coase Theorem in a while, not right now, because right now it won't make any sense. But other than that, we have some idea regarding this thing. So let us look into the aspect that if the polluter is having the right, that is, suppose if the producer that is in the upstream firm is having the right, they will keep doing it. All right. then the total produce of the downstream firm will be affected, but the first firm would will say that they have the right, therefore they are doing it. So any sort of a mitigation comes from the downstream is actually an additional cost in that sense. So this is not necessarily going to be optimal in that sense. So we will discuss this nitty-gritty in a while, in the next lecture or subsequently. Suppose that two newsprint producers are located along a river, right? Now let's have some calculations. So the upstream firm has a production function of the form, say x is equal to 2000 lx of the power of 0.5. Okay. Now, if that is the case, then the downstream firm has a similar production function, but its output may be affected by chemicals that firm X pours in the river. Okay. Now, that is Y is equal to 2000 Ly powered 0.5, which is times X minus X0 alpha. Okay, for X is greater than X0 in that sense. That is, if you want to produce an additional X, if and only if the additional benefit from the X is actually greater. That is what it means. So Y is also having the same sort of logic. So 2000 Ly powered 0.5, where X is equal to or less than or equal to X0, where X0 represents the river's natural capacity for pollutant in that sense. Okay. So assuming that the newsprint sells for $1 per foot and workers earn $50 per day, firm X will maximize profit by setting this wage equal to the labor's marginal product, that is 50, which is equal to P times dou X by dou LX, which is equal to 1000 LX of powered minus 0.5, which is implies that is which means that is an LX star, that is the optimum amount is actually 400. If alpha is 0, no externality, then Ly star is actually the 400, which is optimum. All right. Now, when firm X does have a negative externality alpha, which is less than 0, its profit maximizing decision will be unaffected in that. That is actually your LS star, which is equal to 400. And X star is actually 40,000. That is the total effect. But the marginal product of labor will be lower in firm Y because of the externality. Okay. Now, if there is no externality, then this is the case. If alpha is equal to minus 0.1 and x0, which is equal to 38,000, firm Y will maximize profit by in that context. So let's calculate that with this amount, that is your 50, which is equal to P times of dou Y by dou Ly, which is equal to 10,000 Ly to the power of minus 0.5, which is that is 40 minus 4,000 sorry 40,000 minus 38,000, that is the difference. So that is 50 is equal to 468 Ly to the power of minus 1. Because of the externality Ly is 0, it is actually 87, and Y output will be 8,723. See, a drastic fall in the output of Y in that sense because of the pollution in that case. Suppose that these two firms merge and the managers must now. So this is a classic case, this merging and all. It's a part of an example which Coase himself had placed in his paper, this problem of social cost in 1960, that is marrying the rancher and farmer case. So here it's actually a merging of the firms in that. Suppose that there is two firms merged and the manager must now decide how to allocate the combined workforce. Now, if one worker is transferred from X to Y, output of X becomes, what is that? Higher. That is like X, which is equal to 2000 times 399 to the power of 5. So it is roughly 39,950, and an output of Y becomes 8,796 in that sense. Okay, so the total output increases with no change in the total output. And here, what we say that if it is everything well and good, what you do is actually rearrange your labor force to have an output which is actually almost a no externality case. That is, in the no externality case, our maximum capacity is actually 40,000. Now, in this case, look at the data. Only 50,000, 50 less of 40,000. So that is 39,950 can be actually possible with a reallocation in this particular example. Whereas this is not possible if there is no marrying between or merging between these firms in that sense. So in real world, integration is advisable in only in this context, but it has its own ill effect, which we'll discuss in the subsequent lectures. So total output increases with no change in total labor output. The earlier market-based allocation was inefficient because firms X did not take into account the effect of its hiring decision on firm Y in that sense. Now, this is what is called the production externality. That is, if firm X was to hire one more worker, its output would rise to, that is, X is equal to 2000 times 401 of the power of 0.5, which is 40,050. The private marginal value product of the 401st worker is equal to the wage itself, right? But increasing the output of X causes the output of Y to fall. That is by about 21 units. The social marginal value products of the additional workers is only 29 in that sense. So this is posing a serious mismatch from this particular calculation one can unearth. So this is what is actually the baseline of the externality. Now the question is that how do we resolve this problem, the solution to the externality problem. So the output of the externality producing activity is too high under a market determined equilibrium. So incentive based solution to the externality problem originated with the Pigou, who suggested that the most direct solution would be to tax the externality, creating the entity in that sense. So a solution in that sense, a firm creating entity. So if that is the case, let us look at the graph of it, how we can make sense of it. So if you look into the graph, it is quite clear that you have a S which is equal to MC, which is the marginal cost, and a demand function, and we have an X1 P1. Original case P1 is a price. Market equilibrium will occur at P1 P2, and of course if you have an MC dash, that is if there are external cost in the production of an X, social marginal cost and represented by MC double dash. So there is a price hike and a quantity shrinking will take place if that is the case. So if that is the case, then what Pigou called an equivalent amount of tax can be imposed. A tax equal to these additional marginal costs will reduce output to the socially optimal level X2, which is now the new case. All right, so this is what is actually in the second diagram we can understand with. Now, if that is the case, then the suitably chosen tax on firm X can cause it to reduce its hiring to a level at which the externality vanishes in that sense. So this is a proposition Pigou had in fact made, and because the river can handle pollutant with an output of X which is equal to 38,000, we might consider a tax that encourages the product, the firms to produce at that level. Okay, so output of the X will be in that sense 38,000 if LX is equal to 361. That is the total employee or the labor in that sense. Thus we can calculate T from the labor demand condition, which is 1 minus T MPL, which is equal to 1 minus T times 1000, okay, times 361 because that is the ideal thing of the power 1, which is equal to 15. So your T, which is equal to 0.05. Therefore, a 5% tax on the price firm X receives would eliminate the externality. This is what is actually the proposition of a pollutant pay. Pollutee, a pollutee who is going to pay for his pollution. So this is a kind of a proposition which was advanced by Pigou in his welfare economics. Okay, so the optimum Pigouvian tax in our general equilibrium model is to set a T is equal to inverse of P by G2, because we have already calculated the G2 and Py, and the per unit tax on X should reflect the marginal harm that X does in reducing Y output valued at the price of good. Now it is a good one, but the problem is that it is a very high level of information seeking process, because you should know every single point, that what is the level of pollution, what are the level of cost which they are. Once this is actually there, then the issue is that who is going to charge. There is a difference between the person who are charging and the person who are actually making a sort of a pollution. So this is a gap, information gap between these two things. Then the optimum tax imposition often may not be materialized in that. So with the optimum tax, firm X now faces a net price of a Px minus T and will choose Y output, Y input according to Py, which is equal to Px minus T times Fy. So the resulting allocation of resources will achieve marginal rate of substitution MRS, which is equal to Px by Py, which is equal to 1 by Py plus T by Py, which is equal to 1 by F of Fy minus G2. So this is the culmination of that thing. So the Pigouvian tax scheme requires that the regulator have enough information to set the tax property. In this case, they would need to know firm-wise production function. So this is actually the whole issue start, because now you should know about this thing. So this is actually something to do with the solution of the Pigouvian kind. So now, as I said in the earlier point, as in the beginning, or in subsequently, I said just before the Pigouvian tax introduction, we talked about the rights of the pollution. Okay, who is having the right, and how then that is going to change this thing? If the pollutant is the person who is making pollution having the right, then the other lot of the people will not probably have much of the problem. So that means they will not complain and all, because they have to do, because they don't have the right in that. So then that is also basically makes two kind of an entitlement. So that is a problematic one, according to this particular notion that everybody is having sovereign rights, etc. So that is a separate question altogether. So let's look into the pollution right incident. That is an innovation that would mitigate the informational requirement involved with the Pigouvian taxation is the creation of a market for pollution rights. Suppose that the firm X must purchase from firm Y the right to pollute the river they share. X choice to purchase these rights is identical to its output choice. Now the net value revenue that X receives per unit is given by Px minus R, where R is the payment the firm must make to firm Y for each unit of X it produces. So firm Y must decide how many rights to sell firm X by choosing X output to maximize their profit, or its profit in that sense. So pi Y is equal to P by G times Xi x0 plus rx0. Now, the first order condition of the same is very obvious to all of you. The dou pi y by dou x0, which is equal to p by g2 plus r, which is equal to 0. This is actually kind of understanding. So r is equal to the inverse of p by g2. So the equilibrium solution is identical to that of that for the Pigouvian tax in that sense. So from the firm X point of view, it makes no difference whether it pays the fee to the government or to the firm Y in that sense. So the key feature of the pollution right equilibrium is that the rights are well defined and charitable with zero transaction cost. But that is not the real world. The initial assignment right is irrelevant. That means if bargaining can overcome the problem, in this case, what you have to keep in mind is that bargaining can overcome the problem of externality because the transaction cost is zero. Now, if the bargaining we know in the real world that bargaining cannot overcome the problem. Because why? Because most of the time the externality or the transaction cost of it is very positive. Now that is what is called the initial assignment of the right is irrelevant in a bargaining system, or you call the pure case of market transaction. Subsequent trading will always achieve the same efficient equilibrium. But this is a kind of a sham in that. So suppose that firm X is initially given XT, right to produce and to pollute. It can choose the use these for its own production, or it may sell some to firm Y. Now, profit for firm X are given by, as we know, that pi x, which is equal to px(x0) plus r of txt minus x0, which is equal to px minus r of x0 plus rxt. That is pi x, which is equal to px r minus r or f of y plus rxt in that sense. So we have a tax case, and the profit for the firm Y are given because after your tax deduction, whatever you pay would be actually the kind of profit which you have. This is what it actually means. The profit maximization in this case will lead to precisely the same solution as the case where the firm Y was assigned the right. So the independence of initial right assignment is usually referred to as the Coase Theorem. In the absence of impediment to making bargaining, so all mutual benefit transaction will be completed. So if transaction costs are involved, or if information asymmetry is in play, asymmetry or initial right assignment will matter in that case in place. Okay, so this is the most important observation. So when does the right matter is actually if there is a positive transaction cost, right matters. This is what is the hypothesis says. If there is no positive transaction cost or negative transaction cost, then right assignment has nothing to do, because bargaining will take over, or bargaining will take care of whatever happens in the market. So this is what is actually called the Coast Theorem. Bargaining can overcome the problem of externality when transaction cost is zero, but when transaction cost is positive, then bargaining and its efficiency is always being questioned. With this, let me conclude today's lecture. So thank you for listening me, and thank you so much.